One of the main reasons horror films stay so entertaining is because the characters often seem to lose their ability to think logically the moment things start getting scary. Instead of making practical, safe choices, they tend to do the exact opposite, walking straight into danger and leaving the audience yelling at the screen. This isn't just coincidence. Bad decisions are the fuel that keeps most horror stories moving forward. Without them, the killer might be caught too quickly, the monster might never attack, and the haunted house would remain just another creepy old building. In this section, we'll break down some of the classic dumb choices characters make in horror films that always leave viewers frustrated, amused, and sometimes secretly thankful. Because without these silly mistakes, there would be no story at all. Running toward danger instead of away. One of the most baffling decisions characters make is running directly toward the source of terror. Imagine hearing a blood-curdling scream echoing through the house. Most people would grab their keys, call the police, and get out immediately. But horror movie characters, they grab a candle, whisper, "Who's there?" and walk toward the sound. It's a decision that rarely ends well. Movies like The Conjuring and Insidious are filled with such moments where characters practically invite the danger into their lives by poking around where they shouldn't, ignoring obvious escape routes. Another classic mistake is ignoring the easiest way to escape. We've all seen it. A character being chased by a killer chooses to lock themselves in a closet, bathroom, or attic instead of simply running out the front door. Sometimes, windows are wide open, cars are parked outside, and neighbors are within shouting distance, yet the victim heads in the opposite direction. In Scream, for example, one of the most mocked moments is when a character runs upstairs when freedom was just a few steps away. These decisions may keep the suspense alive, but they defy every ounce of survival instinct. Splitting up the group. Horror movies almost always feature a group of friends, and without fail, someone suggests splitting up. "You check the basement, we'll go upstairs." It sounds logical in their minds, but for the audience, it's an obvious death sentence. Sticking together means strength, but dividing means each person becomes an easy target. This trope has been played straight in films like The Texas Chainsaw Massacre and mocked endlessly in spoofs like Scary Movie. The moment characters separate, the audience knows at least one of them won't be coming back alive. Ignoring local warnings. Another ridiculously bad decision is ignoring the advice of locals or the warning signs right in front of them. How many times have we seen a group of teenagers stop at a gas station where the creepy attendant tells them not to go down a certain road? Instead of listening, they laugh it off and head straight toward doom. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Wrong Turn both use this setup perfectly. The arrogance of outsiders ignoring warnings has become one of horror's most predictable and dumbest recurring mistakes. Trusting the wrong people. A quieter but equally deadly mistake is trusting strangers too easily. Horror often thrives on the idea that the real monster might not be supernatural, but human. Characters, desperate for help, put their faith in someone who turns out to be part of the nightmare. Whether it's accepting a ride from a suspicious driver, letting a stranger into the house, or following a seemingly kind local in an unfamiliar town, these blind leaps of trust rarely end well. Movies like Hostel and The Hills Have Eyes show just how costly such misplaced trust can be. Investigating noises alone. Few things scream bad decision louder than a character investigating strange noises by themselves. Whether it's a thump in the attic, a door creaking in the basement, or footsteps outside in the dark, characters almost always go to check it out without backup. They rarely carry a weapon, often forget to turn on the lights, and walk straight into the waiting arms of the villain. Audiences know from the moment they step into the dark that something awful is coming, making this one of the most frustrating yet predictable decisions in horror. Why these dumb decisions matter. As frustrating as these moments are, they're essential to horror storytelling. If every character acted with perfect logic, many horror movies would last about 10 minutes. The villain would be reported, the haunted house abandoned, and the monster avoided entirely. Instead, bad decisions give the story momentum. They keep audiences on edge, create suspense, and allow the killer or ghost to stay one step ahead. And of course, these dumb choices add a layer of dark humor. Part of the fun of watching horror films is yelling at the screen, predicting what's about to happen, and feeling smarter than the characters who constantly put themselves in harm's way. In the first part, we talked about some of the most common dumb decisions horror characters make, like splitting up, running upstairs instead of outside, or investigating creepy noises alone. But those are only the beginning. Horror movies are filled with so many poor choices that they practically deserve their own rule book of what not to do if you want to survive. In this section, we'll dive into more of the ridiculous, unbelievable, and downright foolish decisions that continue to get horror characters killed and keep us, the audience, shaking our heads in disbelief. Ignoring obvious evidence of evil. One of the most frustrating decisions characters make is choosing to stay in a place even after clear signs of supernatural danger appear. Doors slam on their own, whispers echo through the hallways, furniture moves by itself. Yet instead of running out immediately, they say things like, "It's probably the wind," or "This house just has character." In movies like Paranormal Activity or the Amityville Horror, the evidence of evil is undeniable from the start. But the families decide to tough it out because they just bought the house or don't want to admit something unnatural is happening. This stubborn refusal to acknowledge danger often makes the audience more scared and more annoyed because they know the situation could have been avoided by simply walking away. Dropping weapons at the worst time. Another head-scratching decision in horror movies is when characters actually manage to fight back, only to drop their weapons seconds later. They knock down the killer with a bat, stab the monster with a knife, or shoot the villain, and then, instead of finishing the job, they toss the weapon aside and run. Of course, the villain isn't truly dead, and within moments, they rise again, stronger and angrier than before. This decision has been mocked countless times, especially in slasher films like Halloween and Friday the 13th. The logic makes no sense. Why would anyone willingly give up their only form of defense? Yet horror characters do it again and again, ensuring the danger continues. Choosing the creepiest possible shortcut. Horror films love to remind us that shortcuts are never a good idea. Characters often decide to take the road less traveled, through the woods, an abandoned tunnel, or an unlit alleyway, despite having safer options. Whether it's to save time or because they're feeling adventurous, the outcome is predictable. They run right into danger. Movies like Wrong Turn literally built their entire premise on this mistake. If the characters had just stayed on the main road, they might have survived. Instead, their decision to take a shortcut through the woods became a one-way ticket to terror. Reading or using forbidden objects. Curiosity kills more than just cats. It kills horror characters too. From opening ancient books to reading Latin phrases out loud, characters in horror movies can't seem to resist dabbling in forces they don't understand. The classic example is The Evil Dead, where the Necronomicon is read aloud, unleashing demonic forces. But this trope goes far beyond just books. Characters play with cursed artifacts, use Ouija boards, or experiment with rituals, despite being warned not to. The dumbness here is obvious. When something looks evil, sounds evil, and everyone warns you not to touch it, maybe just leave it alone. But without this mistake, many horror films wouldn't even have a plot. splitting up in dangerous territory, again and again. Yes, we mentioned splitting up in part 1, but it deserves another spot here because horror characters take this bad idea to even more extreme levels. Not only do they divide in haunted houses or forests, but sometimes they decide to investigate solo in places that scream danger. Think of the character who goes alone into the basement of an abandoned asylum, or the one who decides to wander off in the middle of the night while camping. Movies like House on Haunted Hill and Grave Encounters thrive on this stupidity. The characters could stay together, but instead they keep drifting apart, giving the evil more opportunities to strike. Calling out to the killer. This might be the single dumbest thing characters do, announcing their presence to whoever or whatever is lurking. We've all seen it. A character hears a noise and shouts, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Sometimes they even call out the villain's name, as if the killer will politely answer. In Scream and many other slashers, this kind of behavior practically invites the villain to jump out at the worst possible moment. It's a combination of fear, curiosity, and pure recklessness, and it almost always ends badly. Staying behind for one last thing. Finally, we have the classic "I'll be right back" mistake. A group of survivors is about to escape when one character insists on going back for something meaningless, a bag, a pet, or even just curiosity. They leave the safety of the group, wander off alone, and never make it back. This has become such a cliché that Scream famously mocked it with the rule, never say, "I'll be right back." The decision is dumb because survival should always be more important than material possessions. Yet horror characters continue to risk their lives for objects or minor tasks, giving killers the perfect chance to strike. Why we love these dumb decisions. While these choices are frustrating, they're also essential. They create suspense, tension, and those unforgettable jump-out-of-your-seat moments. They also give horror its identity. Characters making bad decisions so the audience can feel smarter, safer, and more engaged. In the end, horror thrives, not because characters act logically, but because they act foolishly. Without their mistakes, we wouldn't have the scares, the suspense, or the fun of yelling at the screen. By now, it's clear that horror characters seem almost programmed to make the worst possible choices. In part 1, we explored classic bad decisions like running upstairs or splitting up. In part 2, we went deeper with mistakes like dropping weapons, reading cursed books, and calling out to killers. Now, in part 3, let's look at the last set of decisions that truly earn their place among the 10 dumbest moves in horror movie history. These are the ones that leave audiences shouting at the screen, throwing popcorn, and wondering if anyone in these films has a shred of common sense. Moving into creepy houses, it's one of the oldest setups in horror. A family buys or rents a house that looks like it came straight out of a nightmare. It's isolated, decaying, and usually comes with a dark history. Maybe someone was murdered there, maybe it's built on cursed land, or maybe locals warn them to stay away. But instead of running in the opposite direction, the characters move in happily, acting surprised when terrible things start happening. Movies like the Amityville Horror, The Conjuring, and Poltergeist all use this premise. Realistically, most people wouldn't last a single night after seeing doors slam on their own or hearing whispers in the dark. But in horror movies, moving into the creepiest house possible seems to be a guaranteed mistake. Ignoring survival tools at hand. Another infuriating mistake characters make is ignoring the tools and resources around them that could actually save their lives. How many times do we see someone hide in a kitchen yet completely ignore the knives, or find themselves in a garage filled with weapons only to run past them in panic? Sometimes it's even worse. Characters have phones but don't call for help, cars but never check the keys, or weapons but refuse to use them. In The Strangers and You're Next, this decision is particularly painful to watch because the victims could have had a fighting chance if they had only used what was right in front of them. Stopping to investigate bodies. Here's another baffling decision. When characters find a body, instead of running for their lives, they get closer to investigate. Sometimes they poke the body, shake it, or turn it over, giving the killer the perfect chance to strike again. Worse still, some characters stand there screaming instead of moving, wasting precious seconds that could have been used to escape. This mistake shows up in countless slashers like Friday the 13th and Halloween. It's the kind of choice that makes the audience groan, because we all know that hesitation is often fatal. Having loud conversations. While hiding horror movies often feature scenes where the characters hide in closets, under beds, or behind doors while the killer is nearby. At first, it's suspenseful, but then one of them starts whispering loudly, crying uncontrollably, or even answering their phone. Suddenly, the hiding spot is useless, and the killer discovers them instantly. This is a classic dumb decision, because silence is survival. Yet, again and again, characters sabotage themselves with noise. Films like A Quiet Place flipped this trope by making silence the rule for survival, but in most horror movies, people just can't seem to stay quiet long enough to survive. Underestimating the villain. Perhaps one of the most fatal mistakes characters make is assuming the killer is dead too early. After knocking the villain down, they turn their back, celebrate their survival, or even waste time talking. Of course, the villain rises again, delivering a final scare. This is such a common trope, it even has a name, the final scare. Movies like Halloween and Friday the 13th thrive on this mistake. If the characters had double-checked and made sure the villain was actually gone, the story might end sooner. But instead, their arrogance or relief becomes their downfall. Splitting from the group out of pride. Another frustratingly common move is when one character, usually the tough guy, decides to wander off because they think they can handle things alone. Sometimes they argue with the group, insisting they don't need help. Other times, they storm off in anger, ignoring the obvious danger. Naturally, they become an easy target. This trope not only kills off characters quickly, but also reduces the group's overall chance of survival. Movies like The Descent and The Mist use this kind of tension to highlight how pride and ego are just as deadly as the monsters themselves. Choosing to stay instead of escape. Finally, one of the dumbest decisions in horror movies is when characters choose to stay in a dangerous situation even after they've been given the chance to leave. Maybe they want to solve the mystery, maybe they don't want to look like cowards, or maybe they're just curious. Whatever the reason, the result is usually the same. They stick around too long and become the next victim. This mistake appears in films like Sinister and Hereditary, where characters could have walked away, but instead lingered, letting evil consume them. Curiosity and stubbornness almost always lead to disaster in horror. Why horror needs these dumb choices? By now, it should be obvious that horror movies would barely exist without dumb decisions. These moments of bad judgment keep the story going, create tension, and give the villains the upper hand. For viewers, it's a mix of frustration and fun. We yell at the screen, laugh at the stupidity, and secretly love the thrill these mistakes bring. After all, if every horror character acted logically, there would be no scares, no suspense, and no iconic moments to remember. Dumb decisions might be frustrating, but they're the lifeblood of horror cinema, and the reason we keep watching.